The relationship between China and the world is changing.
You have to get used to the fact that there's going to be a very big China in this world, a very powerful and developed China.
It's unveiled its biggest stimulus package since the pandemic. But what's next?
很多人就讲了，我们现在是不是就是刺激一下就算了？哎，错误。
The Chinese government still need to find a balance between long-term structural adjustment goals and short-term growth.
There are conflicting signals coming from the government, and that makes foreigners a little shy about investing more.
If we cannot get China right, our investment, our engagement with China also will move to wrong direction.
Catch insights into the transformation of China and what its evolving influence, priorities, and challenges mean for the world. China's Economy, The Road Ahead, 4th and 5th November on CNA.
Come November 5th, America will vote for a new president.
We win! And we will make America great again.
While Vice President Harris and former President Trump have largely focused on domestic affairs, one country has featured heavily in their campaigns.
I want to beat China.
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 From an ongoing trade war.
我都覺得中美貿易戰係影響我哋美國訂單呢幾年最主要嘅因素啦。
To the threat of hot war.
Taiwan is quite a useful strategic area for Washington to continue to press Beijing or even contain Beijing.
US-China relations are at a low point.
They are rival in diplomacy, in trade, cybersecurity, and many other dimensions.
It's the first time in American history that we've had an adversary that is both a national security threat and an economic threat.
Will a change in US leadership be a chance to reset the bilateral relationship, or catalyst for more stormy weather ahead? In the mercurial world of fashion, Kingsley has seen many fickle trends come and go. He's the general manager of Henglong Garment Factory with production lines in Macau and Guangdong Province in mainland China. The company employs some 1,500 people.
我覺得每一個行業或者每間企業都面臨住一個轉型升級嘅挑戰啦。咁我哋以前都係比較傳統啲純加工或者製造嘅，咁其實我覺得未來都係要往住一啲研發啊、設計啊，或者多啲一啲額外嘅增值服務。
But there was one trend that not even Kingsley, with over 2 decades of experience in the industry, could have anticipated: the severity of the US-China trade war.
咁我都覺得中美貿易戰係影響我哋美國訂單呢幾年最主要嘅因素啦。我哋以前係90%，去到而家慢慢係30至40咁樣咯。呢一件事確實對中國好多出口企業係比較大影響，即係以我了解都有好多企業可能原本真係主要都係做美國訂單嘅，都係受呢個貿易戰影響好大，可能係嚴重嘅虧損或者甚至乎倒閉咁樣。
There is one defining characteristic of US foreign policy during the terms of the last 2 presidents: an increasingly adversarial relationship with China.
And you could have an argument about whether the people are leading the politicians or the politicians are leading the people. But in the United States, they're all in the same place. And they're all concerned about China. It's the first time in American history that we've had an adversary that is both a national security threat and an economic threat.
And the trade war is one salvo in this rivalry. The current trade tensions can be traced back to 2018, when Donald Trump was US president.
But
in particular with China. We're going to be doing a Section 301 trade action. It could be about $60 billion. But that's really just a fraction of what we're talking about.
Section 301 of the 1978 Trade Act allows the U.S. president to impose duties or other import restriction on foreign countries engaged in unreasonable or discriminatory acts or policies which burden or restrict United States commerce.
It was the United States that sponsored China's membership in WTO in 2001 on the hopes that China's trade with the world would make China a democratic country in the eyes of the United States. But 16 years later, the Americans concluded that their hypothesis did not work, and therefore China is now a rival, a strategic competitor.
More than 1,300 Chinese goods were on the U.S. tariff list, including solar panels, flat-screen TVs, washing machines, satellites, medical devices, aircraft parts, batteries. China retaliated with tariffs of 25% on 106 items of U.S. products, including automobiles, airplanes, and soybeans.
President Trump launched the trade war vis-à-vis China and imposed, I think, at least 5 rounds of tariffs on those exports from China to the United States.
Every time Trump lobbies a tariff, China would respond with an equal, proportional tariff. It's not an out of this world, right? So tit for tat. And they went on for a few years on that.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
When Joe Biden won the presidency in 2020, he retained Trump's tariff regime. He also placed trade and investment restrictions through instruments like the CHIPS and Science Act, which prohibited export of high-end semiconductors and related technology to China.
You can't have a conversation about trade anymore without it turning to China, and you can't have a conversation about China without it becoming a conversation about national security. So everything is all pushed together. And if you listen to what Biden has said on these things, on the tariffs, it's always about national security and economic security.
Then, in September, the Biden administration finalized a series of increases of duties on certain Chinese products. Tariffs on electric vehicles rose from 25% to 100%. On semiconductors and solar cells, 25% to 50%. And on battery and battery parts, an increase from 7.5% to 25%. At the same time, the government sought to shore up American companies in these sectors. Biden invested $135 billion in America's electric vehicle industry.
He targeted the tariff sanctions on chips, cars, high-end goods, and he imposed high tariffs, whereas President Trump was just imposing tariff left, right, and center in a very unpredictable way.
What triggered these moves were concerns that the American EV industry would lose out to China. The Chinese EV industry has been rising rapidly since 2001. By 2023, China accounted for nearly 62%, or some 6.5 million, of the 10.4 million battery-powered EVs that were produced worldwide. The US, at number 2, made about 1 million EVs, less than 10% of the total, according to the consulting and analyst firm Global Data. What gave Chinese EVs the advantage was price. Last year, an average made-in-America electric vehicle cost more than $50,000, twice the price of an equivalent China-made model.
And if you look at what he's done in keeping the tariffs and then adding on tariffs on EVs, on batteries, and semiconductors, what you see is an effort to basically preserve and protect American industry.
Detroit, Michigan, also known as the Motor City. At the annual Detroit Auto Show in 2022, attendees were abuzz when the Inflation Reduction Act and its associated EV subsidies were announced.
Clearly, 24 will be a big year for us. We'll sell more and produce more in 24 than we do in 23. We'll produce and sell more in 25 than we do in 24. When you fast forward to the Inflation Reduction Act, certainly we're supportive of it. Certainly we're putting initiatives in place that allow us to kind of future forecast what some of the rules are.
For one truck company, the EV subsidies are a boon. Founded in 1946 in Ohio as the Crane Carrier Company, Battle Motors remodified surplus military vehicles for construction and petroleum industries. By the 2020s, Battle Motors, with some 260 employees, transitioned to manufacturing of electric industrial trucks.
When Battle Motors came into being, there was a little bit of skepticism because it was a company that produced electric vehicles, and that's something that's brand new to this part of Ohio.
Under the Inflation Reduction Act, the EV trucks could qualify for as much as $40,000 in subsidies.
The more and more of these electric vehicles that we can get out, the better it is for the environment. It really is. I mean, that's why that's why we're doing this. But it's now becoming financially sensible to do it.
On November 5th, Americans will elect a new president. Like Biden, Vice President Harris has been critical of China's industrial policy.
While he constantly got played by China, I will never hesitate to take swift and strong measures when China undermines the rules of the road at the expense of our workers, our communities, and our companies.
My guess is that potential Harris government will more likely follow the mode of Biden administration's principal China policy, which means that, of course, Washington will continue to maintain a strategic or tense competition with China, but they are also very much interested in trying to set up more guardrails, preventing any kind of a head-on confrontation. I'm not so quite sure what will be the mode of potential Trump administration's China policy. They are talking more about how to compete, not only compete with China, but need to, defeat China, to knock China down and out.
This time round, while on the campaign trail, Trump has promised more tariffs.
Talking about 60% tariffs on Chinese goods. Is that in the cards?
No, I would say maybe it's going to be more than that.
If Trump wins and he pursues the 60% tariff, then that will put a shock to the U.S. economy and to the global economy as well. Every time Trump lobbies a tariff, China would respond with an equal, proportional tariff.
As for Kingsley, he has no illusions about which way the trade tensions will go.
美國客戶喺我哋公司嘅中國嘅銷售比例一定係會持續下降，但係就會從整個集團嚟講，咁我哋就會將美國客戶嘅銷售額移過去東南亞市場嗰邊。
The US-China trade war has been painful for producers and businesses in both countries. Will it get worse with the new occupant in the White House? In the woods of Wisconsin, Will Su is foraging for something you wouldn't normally associate with the American Midwest: ginseng.
So yeah, so we're in luck today. We found one. I didn't catch it until it was in my peripheral vision. And what caught me was this slight yellowing of the leaves. So sometimes ginseng is called green gold. In the fall, the leaves will turn this from green to yellow, and it's a little bit earlier than some of the other plants in the area. So this leaf here actually fell from the plant too. And so sometimes you can spot it based on these leaves turning this goldish color earlier than the rest of the foliage. And I think there might be another one nearby too that's a smaller plant. You want to dig it?
There's a reason Will is so familiar with the ginseng, a plant commonly used in Chinese traditional medicine. His family owns a 100-acre farm growing the herb.
Currently, there's about 1 million pounds of ginseng produced annually from the state of Wisconsin, and 95% of it is grown here in central Wisconsin. The buyers typically come over from Hong Kong, mainland China, Taiwan, East Asia, and come every fall into the winter time frame.
When the trade war started in 2018, China retaliated with tariffs on imported U.S. ginseng. It started with 7.5%, to 15%, to 32.5%, at one point reaching 41%. Ginseng exports plunged by 80% as China stopped buying from America and turned to other suppliers.
The start of the trade war in 2018 was this gradual decline in demand for the product because of the artificial increase in price. That's what a tariff is. It increases the price to the buyer or to the end consumer, and it passes that on. Typically, most people believe it gets passed on to the consumer. However, in a smaller market like this, what tends to happen is the tariffs get actually passed back to the farmer because the buyer and the foreign consumer doesn't want to pay more for the product. No one likes paying more for stuff. This product is so dependent on the Chinese economy and the Chinese consumer that we can't find a large enough market outside of Greater China to sell the product. So in 2018, the crop was trading for around $40 a pound. Today, it trades at about a 30 to 50% discount to that, roughly $20 to $25 a pound. I mean, to the point of where farmers can't make money growing the crop. We're selling below cost.
Will's father, Paul, who started the ginseng farm in 1974, has weathered many storms in the industry over the decades, including price wars with competitors, bad weather, and poor harvests. But this US-China trade war has him questioning about the fate of his lifelong passion.
Wisconsin rely on China for 85% of its market, at least, if not 90%, 85% for sure. But in the last 5 years, even 6, 7 years now, after Trump's administration has a trade war, they slap on 32.5% of tariff onto our ginseng. So we have been suffering. We are getting the price of 1980s. Can you imagine?
Apart from ginseng, China would slap retaliatory tariffs on a host of other agricultural products, such as soy, sorghum, and pork. This was estimated to have cost the US about $27 to $30 billion in lost agricultural exports between mid-2018 and 2019.
One of the things that happened when the Trump tariffs went into effect was the Chinese switched their purchase patterns. They started buying soybeans, for example, from Brazil. And that is market share that we've never entirely regained.
As a truce in 2020, President Trump signed a Phase 1 trade deal with China. The deal committed China to buy $200 billion worth of American exports by 2021. However, 2 years later, analysis of the deal showed that China did not purchase any of those goods and services. Meanwhile, tariffs widened under President Biden, and trade continued to decline between the two superpowers.
In terms of those China's exports to United States during those round of a trade war, from 2018 to 2019, at least about more than $19 billion has lost in terms of China's exports to the United States, and about almost $40 billion in terms of imports from the United States to China. China used to be the biggest trade partner of the United States. Nowadays, China is the fourth trade partner.
The trade war has also caused pain across the Pacific. Ronnie Liang started his manufacturing business in 2003 in Guangzhou, producing refrigeration appliances such as wine cabinets and bar fridges for export.
我们现在北美占大概30%多一点吧，就也算是全球。如果从美国来说，对于单个国家来说，它是最大的。其实我们跟美国做生意呢，应该有10多年的历史了。那近4到6年呢，其实也是有很大的变化。关税一加都加到25%，那其实对于我们的产品呢，在北美的这个售价来说，就产生比较大的影响。基本上都是客户那边的去承担这个关税。那最终来说，所以我们现在在海外的卖价，其实在去到终端市场，其实是高了不少的，下降应该有30%。
As the trade war continued under President Biden, a couple of terms would gain popularity: decoupling and de-risking.
Decoupling is a concept in economics where your production and consumption would be separated. Just like in the Soviet Union and the US, they don't have much trade, right? They are on their own. That's decoupled. Decoupling is total separation of their economy, which is impossible. Because if the US decouples from China, then that would cause a lot of inflation. US buys a lot of goods from China. And American farmers depend on the Chinese market. De-risking is a lower level. That means you continue to trade with one another, but you reduce the risks to national security. So that those are two similar concepts, but in a different continuum.
To de-risk and circumvent tariffs, Ronnie is planning to move some production outside of China.
我们也在考虑在中国以外的，就是关税区设立我们的生产基地，来去避开就是美国对于中国的这个25%的关税。所以现在我们在计划在泰国那边就建立我们的一个工厂。
The Chinese are now moving to Southeast Asia. So during Trump's time, a lot of Chinese companies or Chinese-based companies moved to Vietnam. It's part of a de-risking, so that when the American president imposes high tariff on China, that means they will not be competitive when exporting to the United States. So they move down south to Vietnam so that they can continue to enjoy lower tariffs when they export back to the United States. That is what is meant by economists when they say China +1. It's a de-risking strategy.
However, this is not foolproof. The next president could look to kill the China +1 strategy.
The United States is watching Vietnam, said you are being used willingly by other countries to escape all this tariff. Whoever wins in America would still be thinking, you are just being used by this China +1 to evade all these sanctions, and we will also come after you if you do this. That's why President Trump said that the 60% tariff that he wanted across the board not only applies to China, but it can also apply to Chinese goods produced in Indonesia, Vietnam, and other countries as well.
I want German car companies to become American car companies. I want them to build their plants here. I want to beat China in electronics production, and we'll be able to do that easily. Under my leadership, we're going to take other countries' jobs.
Well, if you have a 60% or 100% tariff, people stop selling because nobody's going to buy if you're doubling the price. So you don't make any money, because there's no imports, so therefore there's no tariff. So They can do that, and the effect of the Chinese retaliation really will be, trade will dwindle to de minimis. Decoupling will become a fact rather than a conversation piece, and both economies will be hurt.
While Vice President Harris has not said much on trade, she has emphasized job creation on her campaign trail.
Over the last 3.5 years, we brought manufacturing back to America. We created 730,000 manufacturing jobs and announced the opening of more than 20 new auto plants in the United States. And we did it by investing in American industry and American workers. And I want to make sure that America, not China, wins the competition for the 21st century.
Quite a number of Washingtonians, either out of their political reason or out of their concerns about the so-called loss, outsourcing of the jobs or manufacturing to China. And they think that those trade deficit itself is the root cause for those outsourcing of the jobs manufacturing to China. So that makes the trade issues as very explosive issues between two sides.
觉得中美这个贸易摩擦，它不会由于政党的改变而去有太多的变化。无论是谁上台，他对中国这方面的政策或者态度应该是差不多的。
And you might be looking at, you might be looking at an industry that isn't here in 20 years.
No winners, only losers in a trade war.
Trade is not the only area of tension between the two titans. Somewhere off the coast of China, military maneuvers flirt with what Beijing has repeatedly called a red line: Taiwan. "41-year-old Wang Jinghong is a self-described tech nerd. Photography and dabbling with robotics are some of his hobbies. Being a drone pilot is a job match made in heaven.
这个真的是我梦想的工作。雷虎这个工作吸引我的地方，就是我很希望可以飞到我在市面上飞不到的飞机。
Jinghong works for Thunder Tiger Technology, a public-listed company in Taiwan which began with manufacturing aircraft engines in 1979. Today, it specializes in design and production of unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones.
真正在做这个军用商规的无人机啊，是在这个俄乌战争啊爆发的前啊，那这样子啊，这个台湾政府啊发现说俄乌战争有这样子的一个无人机，它商业型的公司，像雷虎科技这样的公司，可以制造出商业的无人机，可以是运用在战场上。
Thunder Tiger's shift to producing military-grade equipment paid off. This year, the company signed a memorandum of understanding with 2 U.S. defense contractors: IMSA, a radar manufacturer, and Rapid Flight.Rapid
Flight 啊，它是一个美国的一个国防的一个 innovation 新创的一个公司。那他们的团队啊，过去是从美国的波音的无人机部门啊 spin off 出来。他们的 specialty 是在于说，他们呢用了很多最新的3D 列印的技术，所以说他们有办法设计出 3D print 的无人机。这个美国的公司啊，它代表的是一种非常新创的一个无人机的一个行业。大家以为无人机是很久的、很贵的，或是很难制造的，那他们把它这个3D 化列印化、轻量化。所谓的地缘政治的紧张不一定会在1-2年内消失。那我们也不能错误的期待我们的对手或邻居他们会自己就是示弱。
On geopolitical tensions, there is one clear red line between the US and China: the status of Taiwan.
在这个关系中国主权和领土完整的问题上，中国没有妥协的空间。拜登总统在会晤中再次重申，美方坚持一个中国政策，不支持台独。
China considers Taiwan a breakaway province. The US adopts the One China policy, which recognizes the People's Republic of China as the sole legal government of China. Washington acknowledges, though not necessarily accepts, China's position that Taiwan is part of China. Nonetheless, the last two presidential terms saw increasingly close ties between US and Taiwan. America sold billions of arms to the island during this period, peaking when Donald Trump was president. Then, in August 2022, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, making her the highest-ranking US official to do so in 25 years.
So for this cross-strait and the Taiwan Strait stability, you can see Biden, he's pulling Japan and the Philippines into the dialogue, into the discussions. He's also forming the AUKUS with UK and building an alliance with UK and Australia.
I think this is the driving force for Washington to move even more closer to Taiwan, because they believe that all those sources of tension is caused by Beijing. And so Washington said that they need to more intervene into the strait. They think that Taiwan is quite a useful strategic area, right, a place for Washington to continue to press Beijing or even contain Beijing.
In response, since 2018, China has conducted military exercises around Taiwan with increasing frequency. Reacting to Speaker Pelosi's visit in August 2022, China held its largest ever full-scale military exercise, including lobbing missiles over Taiwan. In May 2024, China repeated the full-scale military drill, codenamed Joint Sword 2024A, which included the Chinese Coast Guards for the first time. This was to sound Beijing's displeasure with Taiwan's new president, William Lai's inauguration speech, which had hinted at a more muscular response to cross-straits relations.
You can count how many naval exercise or Air Force exercise that happened. So China is testing the limits of Taiwanese defenses. Some people say this is psychological warfare, and I think the number has spiked in the last 4 years because of worries that under DPP, Taiwan might declare separation from China, which is really a red line for China.
As tensions escalated in cross-straits relations, Taiwan's military budget steadily crept up. During former President Tsai Ing-wen's term from 2016 to 2024, the defense budget went from $560 million in 2017 to $13.8 billion in 2024.
Taiwan's government just released their military budget for 2025. It was around like $20.2 billion, and it's around like 7.7% of increase comparing to the budget in 2024. And we are also seeing that last year in 2024, the budget to the GDP was like 2.38% of the GDP, and before this year it will account for like 2.45% of the GDP.
In December 2023, Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research conducted a survey to gauge the level of public support for the increased military spending.
There's a poll suggesting that around like 60% of people, they support this increase.
But there is an opportunity cost to bumping up military spending. Taiwan's economic growth has slowed, youth unemployment is climbing, and society is aging.
This is a zero-sum game. More spending on the military means less budget for housing, healthcare, and insurance. And the Taiwanese economy is a bit sluggish.
This daycare center in Taipei City is one of some 5,000 across the country. It provides daily services for the elderly, from social activities to exercise classes and communal meals.
我觉得台湾在面临高龄化社会这件事情，绝对是一个很大的浪潮。当需求的面向越来越广，或我们更重视高龄者的自主的议题、人权的议题的时候，这边的服务会浮现出来。所以，要么就是政府得要编列预算，那要么就是民间单位像我们这样会觉得这个题目很重要，所以我们来寻求更多的社会资源来支持我们去提供这个服务。
Driven by tensions, cross-straits trade numbers continue to decline. Taiwanese exports to the mainland shrunk over 18% in 2023. Here, closer US ties could fill the gaps left by the Chinese. According to the US Census Bureau, from 2017 to 2022, US-Taiwan merchandise trade more than doubled, reaching $136 billion in 2022.
Economic ties in recent years have improved. Their importance to our economy has grown significantly in recent years, largely because of semiconductors.
Come November, when Americans go to the polls, how will the next US president address the Taiwan issue vis-a-vis China?
I will say before Trump, including Obama administrations and other administration before him, they're extremely cautious and even afraid of pissing China off. But Trump doesn't care about that. And we can also see that there's a paradigm shift of US policy against China after Trump administration.
If a potential Trump administration, some of his hawkish advisors, they even advocate a more aggressive policy on Taiwan, including a formal recognition of Taiwan's sovereignty. And that will make things extremely unpredictable. That will really cross those red lines and make things extremely, explosive.
As for Vice President Harris, she will likely continue the current policy positions.
And we will continue to support Taiwan's self-defense, consistent with our long-standing policy.
On October 14, the Chinese launched military drills and encircled Taiwan with ships and warplanes, just days after President Xi Jinping reiterated the goal of reunification.
我们要坚决反对台独分裂活动，实现祖国完全统一。
I think the principle is the U.S. would still respect the one China policy and will not encourage open separation or independence declaration by Taiwan, because that is a red line for China. I don't think Trump will change this, or whoever is the U.S. president will probably not touch this red line.
The world's top two leading powers, each with their vision of global leadership. How will the next US president compete with China on global influence?
In this season of harvest, I'm delighted to gather together with so many old and new friends in Beijing to discuss grand plans for China-Africa friendship and cooperation in the new era. Modernization is an inalienable right of all countries, but the Western approach to it has inflicted immense sufferings on developing countries.
Chinese President Xi Jinping made these remarks at the 2024 Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, or FOCAC. He presented a different vision of development from the Western-led model. Since President Xi came to power in 2013, he has sought to shore up China's global influence through platforms like the FOCAC, the Belt and Road Initiative, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and BRICS.
Most people would see that as China is trying to build its diplomatic muscle, where the U.S. is weak. For example, Shanghai Cooperation in Central Asia, South Asia, and then the Africa-China relations. The U.S. is not present in Africa, so China is courting that. And then BRICS also. And then basically China is flexing its diplomatic muscle to win more friends.
The interest of China in those BRICS groups is largely because, the Chinese government, President Xi Jinping himself, think that the rising of this group, what Beijing called a rising of those emerging economy, is the most important defining feature of the international relationship in the past few decades.
I think the China approach was about leverage. They're doing a variety of things in their economic sphere that we don't like. Subsidies, forced technology transfer, IP theft, discrimination against Western companies in China. They are attempting to expand their influence globally, but they're attempting to expand it economically and not really militarily.
At the same time, the US has not been sitting idle. After a period of perceived isolationism under President Trump, President Biden would renew friendships with allies.
American leadership must meet this new moment of advancing authoritarianism, including the growing ambitions of China to rival the United States and the determination of Russia to damage and disrupt our democracy. We must meet the new moment, accelerating global challenges, only to be solved by nations working together and in common. We can't do it alone.
Under Biden, the US would recommit to NATO. It also formed nascent alliances, such as AUKUS and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the Americans led efforts to supply arms to Ukraine and impose sanctions on Russia.
One of the extraordinary things that Biden did was to get not just NATO, but 38 countries together in a sanctions program against Russia. And that was because of Ukraine. The question that we worry about here in the United States is, if China did the same thing to Taiwan, would those same 38 countries line up with us?
What then will be the nature of American global leadership under a new president?
I think it'd be pretty much status quo under Kamala Harris. I think one of the distinguishing marks of the Biden administration is the US finally realized that it cannot force anything, initiative, on its own in the region. It needs allies, not only allies, it needs partners. And I think that Trump, if he does become president, I hope he realizes that this is power to strength for the United States. You achieve power by agglomerating your alliances and partnerships.
This is quite a tragedy that for the international community, that when we lack a kind of a global leadership or collective leadership, we have seen a more chaotic turbulence.
But there could also be areas of cooperation where the next US president finds complementarity with China. One possible issue of agreement is climate change. In July 2023, US climate envoy John Kerry visited Beijing to revive talks on climate cooperation, which had stalled the year before.
我们愿同包括美国在内的世界各国一道，继续以实际行动为应对全球气候变化做出贡献。
So I think that both sides have to live with the realities, how to manage the competition or even conflicts in a more professional way, while try to maintain the lines of communication workable, and at the same time to continue to explore those areas of collaboration and cooperation, such as the climate change, such as the governance of AI, for instance, such as whether it is possible to work together to prevent new rounds of global crisis, etc.
Which presidential candidate is more likely to find such common grounds with Beijing?
There's no harm for Harris to cooperate with China on climate change. She's from California. It burnishes her green credentials.
Harris government, still likely that both sides could work together on those common agenda, like climate change. But if for Trump, potential Trump administration, the story will be quite different.
Come November 5th, 2024, around 214 million Americans, like farmer Will Su, will be eligible to vote for the next leader of the free world.
I don't know if either party is going to really meet the needs and of what I'm looking for in a presidential candidate. And I think it's because we've probably closed the book on the free trade era. So that's why I honestly believe you're choosing between two evils.
On the ballot, two candidates of vastly differing styles and worldviews. And by most accounts, this will be an ugly and bitter contest.
Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged. And he is out for unchecked power. That's what he's looking for.
So you have to tell Kamala Harris that you've had enough, that you just can't take it anymore. We can't stand you. You're a shit vice president. The worst.
But when the dust settles and there is a new occupant in the White House come January 2025, the next US president will have to turn his or her attention to a rival much further away: China.
U.S.-China relations were probably at their lowest point in 2023. I think thanks to conversations between Xi Jinping and Biden, they've gotten better, but they have a long way to go. Whenever big countries are bumping up against each other, the world is in a dangerous place. We've been in that place for a long time.
Whatever happens to U.S. politics, I don't think it will fundamentally change how the U.S. Sees China. Whether it's a Republican or Democrat, or whether they're chaotic or stable, they would always see China as their rival. Vice versa. With China, they would always see the United States as a rival trying to contain China. So whatever happens, the fundamentals will not change. If they have something in common, work it out. If they have something differences, talk it out. I think that's the message that the rest of the world wants to convey whoever wins the U.S. presidency.
Come November 5th, Americans vote for the next president. On the ballot are two contrasting candidates: former President Donald Trump.
Kamala, you're fired! Get out!
And Vice President Kamala Harris.
Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged.
In a special election forum, Insight unpacks what a new American leader means for the US, Asia, and the world. Insight, Thursday on CNA.
An often fruitless search for their birth families.
Mom, why is it so hard to find you? I want you to find me.
Given up or torn apart to sustain a global adoption industry.
보상이라도 나는 받고 싶고 원상복구 해놔라 이거지. 애를.
South Korea's baby exports. Wednesday on CNA.
Saturday on Japan Hour. 物価高を逆手に都市部へ進出する激安スーパー。看板商品の開発を託された大塚さん。
一品一品が深くならないとやっぱ戦えない時代になってるんですよ。
これもう周りが火が入ってしまってこれダメですか。
だからもっとこうなんか水分が出るものをしかないかんか。
何が選ばれるのでしょうか。Japan Hour Saturday on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation, MUFG
committed to empowering a brighter future. Zip Air, winter fares are now available. And IHI.
As Wall Street enters the home stretch of the earnings season, Apple is expected to round off the week with its biggest quarterly revenue jump in 2 years, thanks to an iPhone revival in China. But the focus will be on the firm's long-term plans for artificial intelligence as it continues to play catch-up. We'll bring you those numbers on your next Asia First.